At a lavish party hosted by Lena, she found her boyfriend Paul drunk and isolated, completely absorbed in an NFL game. Once a league MVP, Paul's career had collapsed after a match-fixing scandal landed him a 5-year probation. The weight of the scandal drove him to drink and lose himself in the games he had once dominated. Lena urged Paul to dress up and join the guests, warning him he risked being thrown out if he refused. Unwilling to comply, Paul lied to Lena, locking her in the dressing room before stealing her luxury car to roam the city streets. Fortunately, a friend nearby heard Lena's cries and quickly freed her. Furious and desperate, Lena called 911 to report the car theft. Police soon pursued Paul, briefly stopping him but hesitating to arrest the fallen star. Drunk and reckless, Paul crashed into a police car and fled once again. The chase escalated rapidly, with multiple squad cars and helicopters joining the pursuit. During the frantic chase, Lena called Paul, begging him not to damage her car as she watched the pursuit unfold on television. Seizing the moment, Paul stopped at an intersection and caused a collision between police vehicles. After his car was wrecked, Paul exited shouting that his relationship with Lena was over. That was just the beginning of his punishment. This is the longest yard. Not long after, he was sentenced to 3 years in prison for drunk driving and sent to Allenville Prison, a harsh facility known for its strict guards. The head guard, Hazen, was a football fanatic who also managed the prison's guard football team. Deputy head guard Nauer warned Paul that Hazen would want him to coach the team, but Paul refused, unwilling to be controlled by inmates or guards. Nauer then assaulted Paul, forcing him to reject Hazen's offer when confronted. With no other choice, Paul agreed to meet Hazen. In Hazen's office, accompanied by political advisor Errol, it became clear that Hazen had engineered Paul's transfer to the prison and now wanted him as the team advisor. Even Nauer supported the plan. Despite this, Paul stayed true to his word and refused. Displeased, Hazen warned Paul that his time in prison would become much harsher if he did not cooperate. With that, Hazen dismissed Paul and ordered Nauer to find a way to force him onto the team. Nauer stormed out, furious at Paul's defiance.
Sit down!
In the prison cafeteria, nearly all the inmates despised Paul because of his involvement in the match-fixing scandal that had shaken the football world. Fortunately, an inmate known as Caretaker offered Paul a place to sit. Caretaker was well known for providing contraband like cigarettes and drugs, and he advised Paul not to show any weakness by allowing others to mock or intimidate him. Taking the advice seriously, Paul immediately struck an inmate who refused to share a table, sparking chaos throughout the cafeteria. To restore order, a guard threw a rubber ball grenade, forcing everyone to duck. At that moment, Nauer approached Paul and warned him to behave. Paul mocked Nauer, calling him a leader of fools. Angered by the insult, Nauer attacked, but Paul blocked the blow, earning respect from the inmates. However, his defiance resulted in a harsh beating by the guards and a week in solitary confinement under scorching heat. After 7 days, Paul was released to meet Hazen. Hazen showed him the prison's football facilities and explained that his team was made up of former athletes who never made it to the pros. Although they played for money, they lacked respect for Hazen. He believed Paul could turn the team around. Paul proposed a warm-up match between the guards team and an inmates team. Hazen liked the idea and asked Paul to form and play on the inmate team. Paul refused, wanting to serve his sentence quietly, but Hazen threatened to extend his term by 5 years for assaulting Nauer. Reluctantly, Paul agreed, on the condition that Nauer stay away during team formation. Hazen accepted and gave Paul 4 weeks to build the team. News of the team spread quickly. Caretaker rallied the inmates, calling it their chance to fight the guards directly. Interest grew, but Deacon tore up the flyer, doubting Paul's intentions based on past betrayals. Later, Paul and Caretaker arrived at the practice field, which was in terrible shape. Despite the poor conditions, a strong inmate named Switowski lifted a chair with 8 others at once, impressing Paul enough to recruit him first. As more inmates tried out, many lacked basic skills like stamina or blocking. Switowski stood out again by breaking a goalpost with a powerful tackle. Paul began coaching, but the inmates fought each other more than competing for the ball. After practice, an inmate named Unger tried to encourage Paul, but Paul ignored him. Soon after, Nate, an older inmate and former top player, appeared. He wanted to join to take revenge on the guards. Paul welcomed Nate immediately, who promised to help find the best inmates for the team. The next day, Hazen watched his prison football team practice while waiting for news from Paul. On the field, Nate introduced his friend Rivers, who had been locked up longer after attacking Hazen and knew where the inmate records were kept. Together, they planned to use those records to identify potential players. Suddenly, a fight broke out among the inmates. While the guards broke up the brawl, Paul and his group slipped into the records room. There, they found a list ranking inmates by violence. Marked with stars, the more dangerous the inmate. Determined to challenge the guards seriously, Nate agreed to recruit the highest-ranked inmates. Paul soon sought out a 5-star inmate locked in the basement under heavy guard. Turley was banging his head against the wall, and when approached, he shouted loudly, frightening Paul away. Next, they approached another 5-star inmate, Torres, who was initially uninterested. However, after a guard forced Torres to leave early from his cell, Torres called Paul, eager to join and get back at his former guard. During practice, Torres unleashed his power, knocking teammates unconscious. Paul then met Battle, another 5-star inmate who wanted to injure Nauer after learning he was the guard's quarterback. Battle quickly joined, significantly boosting the team's strength. However, the team moved slowly, making passing difficult, and Paul took a hard hit from Battle. Realizing they needed more speed, Caretaker suggested recruiting inmates who played basketball. At the court, Deacon led a group and mocked Paul's arrival. Paul challenged Deacon to a one-on-one match, with the first to 11 points winning. If Paul won, the basketball players would join the football team, but if he lost, Paul could never approach them again. The game was rough, with Deacon playing dirty, pushing and hitting Paul to block his shots. Despite the fouls, Paul kept rising, surprising Deacon with his persistence. The match ended when Deacon scored the winning point after a foul call on Paul. As Paul prepared to leave, Megett stopped him, impressed by Paul's spirit. Megett decided to join the team, confident he could play running back. Megett quickly proved his skill in practice, breaking through defenders trying to stop him. Meanwhile, Errol informed Hazen that a major sports media outlet wanted to cover the upcoming guards versus inmates match. With Paul playing, the game promised to attract significant attention. Hazen welcomed the news, knowing it would boost his campaign for governor. Elsewhere, Turley was playing ping pong alone when Paul joined him. Paul introduced football and invited Turley to join the team. At first, Turley was indifferent, but after learning he could face the guards who harassed him during cell checks, he agreed. During a game, Turley followed Paul's defensive instructions but then kicked Switowski, breaking his nose. Switowski believed the act was deliberate and wanted to quit. Paul patched him up and convinced Turley to apologize.
I'm sorry. He said he was sorry.
At the same time, Unger was revealed as a spy for the guards. After noticing Megett's speed, Unger warned Nauer to watch him carefully. Unger was kicked out of practice, and the guards began plotting their next moves. That afternoon, Megett was organizing books in the prison library when guards came to harass him. One guard, Dunham, repeatedly knocked the books to the floor, while another deliberately moved the camera to avoid being recorded. Despite their provocation, Megett remained calm. Deacon and his crew watched from a distance, but dared not intervene. After the guards left, Deacon stepped in to help Megett clean up the mess. A week before the match, the inmates team relied heavily on Megett as their main runner. Nate realized they needed more players to score points. Soon, Deacon and some basketball players joined, strengthening the team considerably. With new additions, the inmates' skills improved quickly. Deacon caught a hard pass from Paul and scored, boosting Nate's confidence. Still, Paul remained wary of Unger, knowing he was a threat. The following day, Paul met Hazen on the golf course and asked him to keep Unger away from the team. Hazen questioned why Paul suddenly cared so much. Paul admitted this was the first time he truly felt like he had a family. Hazen promised to respond the next day. True to his word, Hazen's response was to flood the practice field, hoping to halt training. However, Paul turned the setback into motivation, rallying the team to keep pushing forward. With only 3 days left before the match, Hazen's move revealed his growing fear. Though the guards laughed at Paul's efforts, the inmates charged onto the flooded field and trained harder than ever. Meanwhile, Nate and Caretaker planned their retaliation. Nate and Deacon searched medical records for guards who had been injured, while Caretaker smuggled new football shoes from Megett. As game day approached, the guards trained with full facilities, while the inmates made do with only the basics. Despite the disparity, the inmates remained united, even sharing meals to build team spirit. That night, Caretaker shared some smuggled alcohol with Paul. They talked about family and their pasts. Caretaker showed Paul a photo of his mother and expressed his hope to see her again after his release. When Paul was asked about his involvement in match fixing, he denied any guilt, insisting the news had been wrong. Caretaker hoped to obtain a recording of the guards' match, but Paul had other plans. The next morning, Paul persuaded Hazen's secretary, Lynette, who liked him, to give him the recording of the guards' match. In exchange, Paul agreed to spend some of his free time with her. Later, in the screening room, Caretaker secretly swapped the original film for the recording. Unger caught the switch and reported it, prompting the guards to order him to attack Paul before the game. One day before the match, Nate encouraged the inmates, calling the game their chance for revenge. Caretaker left the field to surprise Paul. Meanwhile, Unger sneaked into Paul's cell and soon left. When Caretaker entered Paul's cell to leave a photo of Paul's NFL days, he was disturbed by a radio that wouldn't turn off. The radio was rigged with a bomb planted by Unger. The explosion trapped Caretaker inside. Paul tried to help, but the door was locked. Despite his efforts, Caretaker could not be saved. The next morning, the inmates gathered at Caretaker's grave. They placed their valuables on the coffin as it was lowered into the ground. Paul laid down a photo of Caretaker's mother and vowed to avenge what had happened. That afternoon, both the inmates team and the guards team arrived at the University of Texas Stadium. The venue was heavily secured with watchtowers, officers, and barbed wire to prevent any escape attempts. Despite the tight security, the atmosphere felt like a real game, complete with cheering fans, media coverage, and food vendors. After the bus ride, each team headed to their respective locker rooms. Before kickoff, Warden Hazen issued a stern warning that any escape attempt would be met with immediate execution. Once Hazen and the guards left, Paul stepped forward to lift the inmates' spirits, which were still heavy from Caretaker's recent death. Caretaker had prepared jerseys for the team, named Mean Machine, sparking renewed hope among the players. As the teams took the field, TV host Dwayne and inmate Bob introduced Allenville's team to cheers and a cheerleading squad. Mean Machine faced jeers, especially directed at Paul. Yet they found unexpected support from other prison inmates, including a cheer squad of gay inmates.
We're the Mean Machine, don't mean to dish ya. We're gonna kick your ass and then we'll kiss ya. Hey!
Paul was surprised and encouraged to see Nate suited up and ready to play. When the game started, Mean Machine focused more on attacking the guards than pursuing the ball. With no defense on the ball carrier, Allenville scored easily. Hurley and Torres targeted guards who had harassed them, allowing Allenville to score twice and build a 14-point lead. Mean Machine seemed to be venting revenge rather than playing seriously. Paul snapped at his teammates, warning that losing like this would stain their legacy forever. The team apologized and promised to refocus. Soon after, Mean Machine began to show signs of progress. Megget challenged Allenville's defense, though he was stopped just short of scoring. Deacon nearly scored, but was tackled hard without a foul being called.
I'm in this hellhole for man to make a call.
Unsportsmanlike conduct. 88.
Frustrated by the referee ignoring fouls committed by Allenville, Paul retaliated by throwing the ball at the referee's crotch twice, knocking him down. Finally, the referee agreed to officiate the game fairly.
How about from now on you call a fair game? How's that sound?
Sounds good.
Okay. Wet Willie.
Mean Machine pushed closer to the end zone. Switowski tackled a guard despite a brief scuffle. Then Paul passed to Deacon, and the team scored their first touchdown. An angry Dunham tried to break through, but fell near Megget and mocked him. Megget rallied Switowski, who pummeled Dunham until he was out of the game. Paul urged the team to play like they had during their wet practice sessions. Although Deacon hesitated, Paul insisted. When the game resumed, Mean Machine's short passes overwhelmed Allenville, with Megget nearly scoring again. The crowd roared as the first half ended in a tie at 14-14. In the locker room, Nauer was furious at his team for being humiliated by the inmates in front of the crowd. Meanwhile, Hazen approached Paul, upset that his team had been embarrassed. When Paul argued that the game was not over, Hazen revealed that Unger had confessed Paul had ordered him to kill Caretaker. Paul dismissed the accusation as a lie, but Hazen threatened to add 25 years to Paul's sentence if he didn't cooperate. Reluctantly, Paul agreed on the condition that his team would not be harmed. Hazen consented, but demanded that Allenville be allowed to lead by 2 touchdowns if they won. Before the game resumed, Hazen met with Nauer and ordered him to attack Mean Machine if Allenville's lead grew too large. The second half began with Paul replacing Megget as the main player. On his first 2 plays, Paul threw carelessly, allowing Allenville to score 2 touchdowns. Hazen was pleased, but Nauer was not. After fulfilling his role, Paul stopped playing. Nate put Bruce in a quarterback, but Bruce couldn't throw and was soon injured after a hard hit. Nate and Switowski began to suspect something was wrong with Paul. Deacon approached Paul, reminding him that Caretaker had never fought for a loss. Seeing his injured teammates losing hope, Paul asked Rivers if he regretted attacking Hazen and receiving a life sentence. Rivers said no. Hearing this, Paul returned to the field, surprising Hazen. However, his teammates ignored him and let Allenville tackle him twice. Frustrated, Paul decided to play solo. He dodged all defenders and nearly scored. Afterward, Paul gathered the team and confessed that he had been involved in match fixing before. He explained that Hazen had forced him to lose this game by threatening to accuse him of killing Caretaker if he refused. Now, Paul vowed to stay longer in prison rather than repeat his mistake. Paul's honesty reunited Mean Machine. Even Tully became determined to win. Nauer was pleased because they were playing with spirit. Slowly, Mean Machine advanced. Turley scored, closing the gap. The crowd, once silent, now cheered for the exciting game. As Allenville neared being caught, Nauer tried to add points. Battle tackled him, allowing Torres to steal the ball and push toward the goal. Mean Machine used a confusing formation, clustering almost all players on one side. Paul passed to Deacon while the team protected him, leading to another touchdown. They needed one more touchdown tie. Nate ordered Bruce to kick, despite his poor skill. The kick was a trick designed to quickly attack Allenville's goal. The plan worked, infuriating Hazen.
Felt unnecessary.
Unfortunately, Meggett was injured and out. Nate replaced him. Paul hesitated to pass to Nate, but Nate promised not to ask for the ball. The crowd, including inmates inside the prison, cheered loudly. With 6 seconds left, Paul started the play. He placed the ball on the ground for Nate, who picked it up and ran to score. The game was tied and went into overtime. In overtime, Nate called a special strategy. Paul looked confused as the team lined up. Allenville thought Mean Machine was disorganized and relaxed. Suddenly, Paul approached Nate as if to argue, but the ball was already thrown to Deacon, now quarterback. Paul, wide open, caught the ball and ran for a touchdown. Mean Machine won. After the victory, the crowd was amazed, including inmates inside the prison. Captain Nauer congratulated Paul and admitted he knew Paul was innocent of Caretaker's death.
Thank you.
Later, Hazen spoke with Nauer about the loss. Seeing Paul walking toward the exit, Hazen thought he was escaping and ordered Nauer to shoot. As Nauer aimed, Paul bent down to pick up a ball, so Nauer lowered his weapon. The ball was Paul's gift to Hazen, a memento of the match. At the end, 2 inmates splashed Hazen with water, but he didn't mind. The day still felt like game day. The end. So the moral of the story is don't mess with the game or the guards, or you'll end up playing for real behind bars.